Okay, so welcome to those of you on YouTube and those of you watching the live stream here later after the fact on replay. Thanks for joining us wherever you are. Today we're going to talk about Mosaics Grade 7 Group 2 repertoire, which in Conservatory Canada is all of the classical stuff. So just give me a minute here to check my settings and make sure we're organized. And it looks like we are live, so that's good. Those of you in the Zoom room here, thanks for joining me today. So Mosaics Group 2, here's the Mosaic 7 book for those of you that haven't seen it yet. It is available on the Harvard Wanless website, and we read through about a month ago, I read through the Baroque music for you, which the Conservatory Canada is Group 1. I'm going to play through the 7 classical pieces today that represent our Group 2, and I'll talk a little bit in detail about each one. Maybe I'll just share my screen for a moment here. I'll take you over to the Harvard Wanless website. Those of you that are curious to get this now, here's Harvard Wanless music, and there's a banner right across the top. You can click that banner at the top of their screen, and that should take you to the Mosaic section there in the Harvard Wanless music website. The grade 7 will be in Long and McQuaid stores for those of you that rely on that. It's going to be there probably within a couple of weeks. But any of this is ready to order now through Harvard Wanless. It's been up there for about 3 weeks. You can see all the other books there, right from Prep through to grade 7. And you'll see this, I haven't talked about this yet, but I've got a copy of this Braille-ready format for the Prep book. This is something that's really interesting, that we were approached by the National Network for Equitable Library Service in Canada, the NNELS. They get substantial grant funding to produce many different types of books, whether it's literature, novels, nonfiction, and also music, to emboss these publications in Braille. And they asked if they could, if they could do some of our books. And so I think the plans are in the works to also do grades 1, 2, and 3. But I have a copy here of what the Prep book looks like. If anybody wanted a Braille-ready format, apparently they can produce these on demand. And all of the music is there embossed in Braille, so you can feel the Braille there. I know at Conservatory Canada we have one student who's been taking some of our exams for voice and also piano in the past, who goes to the school in Brantford, Ontario, the School for the Blind, travels there regularly. And I know they're interested at the blind school there in getting this Braille-ready book. And they're looking forward to the 1, 2, 3. So that's just, when you see that there, just know that that's what that's all about. And that's funded by the National Network for Equitable Library Service. A really great thing. So if you want a grade 7 book now, this is where you can get it. Long and McQuaid stores and other retailers should be able to get it through them anytime now, any day. You can. Some of you have been calling where the retailer doesn't know where to get our books now. No longer available at Hal Leonard. We ended our relationship with them last year, and now everything is available through Harvard Wanless. So just direct your retailer there, or you can purchase yourself through the Harvard Wanless website. We're going to talk about grade 7 today. Here's the table of contents. I'm just going to share this in a format that's a little better here for you, so you can see my screen. So last time we went through about 8 or 9, I guess it was 9 harpsichord pieces, and today only 7 classical pieces. I know some of you may wonder why we don't have so many there. Usually we would have more in a conservatory album than just 7 choices. We actually ran into a lot of Group 3, like a lot of really great music that we wanted to get out there. You can see the listings there coming up, and I plan to play through those with you in the coming weeks. Hopefully in about 3 weeks from now I can read through about half of that with you in a repertoire session, and then we'll follow up as we did last time with grade 6, where I divided Group 3 into 2 sections. And they're sort of roughly laid out there, so you have the romantic music first, about the first 12 or 13 selections, and then the next 11 are from the modern era. And I'm looking forward to reading through all that with you. But there was so much great music there, including music by women composers historically that we had never seen before necessarily until the last few years. So we've included a lot of that there. We just felt that in the classical period we have a bunch of really interesting, sort of just slightly off the beaten path pieces here in different ways, and I'll speak to each of those as I play through them today. But we thought this would give you a really good representation of classical music that we haven't necessarily seen much of before, in different styles, a lot of it in the pre-classic era, which is most of classical music, in fact. It isn't until we get to Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven where things kind of mature and we get these more recognizable forms. But there's all this other stuff that was written starting around 1720 through to 1800. that was in different ways, different styles. The form wasn't not all that complete, and composers were experimenting. As long as they could get away from the excesses and the extravagance of Baroque music, they were happy, and so they were curious to find and explore these other ideas. And so that's what we'll go through a little bit today. Of course, if anyone wants to supplement with other music in the classical period for grade 7, by the time we get to grade 7, hopefully we are doing that. It's okay to rely just on the conservatory book if that's what you want to do. But by this point in a student's development, they're probably craving more at times outside the conservatory books, so we would direct you to the syllabus lists, which are quite vast in Conservatory Canada. Looking at the sonatinas, the other sonatinas of Clementi, the sonatinas of Kuhlau, for example. You'll notice we don't have Mozart here. Mozart's hard to find things at this level that aren't of the Viennese sonatas, which originally weren't even written for piano, and so we decided not to include any of those movements here. Some of them do appear in the syllabus, and of course you're welcome to use those on exams. And of course, at any time, if you find other music that isn't on our lists, just scan and send it to the office, and we'll have that appraised for free. If you feel it's at the grade 7 and we agree with you, then students can use that on an exam, any instrument, any level. Most of you know that. Those of you in the Zoom room here with me, if you have any questions as I go through, throw them in the chat box. I'll monitor that a little bit as I go. I'm going to be altering my volume. Also, feel free to let me know if you're not hearing something clearly. And again, overall, you're probably going to find the volume of the playing a little bit on the softer side if you're just using small computer speakers. I know my computer, I don't rely on those small speakers so much anymore as the computer ages, and I'm using an external speaker to listen to during exams, especially listen to good music. And you should be able to hear me a lot more clearly if you're doing that, and those of you watching on YouTube on the replay as well, you'll probably benefit from hearing the music a little better there. So we're going to start off today, Group 2, with a sonata by Mateo Albéniz. This is not Isaac Albéniz, the more famous composer from Spain, but another Albéniz. And he was firmly in the classical period. You'll hear remnants of Scarlatti in this. If I wasn't listening that closely, I would think this was a Scarlatti piece, in fact, full of interesting Spanish references to flamenco music, lots of repeated notes, lots of tumbling action, and it's quite difficult and tricky for students, I think, to pull this off. Lots of acrobatics and things like that. So we'll start off with Mateo Albéniz's Sonata in D major. I'll get the screen up on the score here. I'm just going to fast forward to that spot. This is a 3-page piece. Here it is here. Here's a look at the first page. I'll leave that up as I play. Here's the second page. And then just a little bit of the third. Oh, where's our third page? 1, 2, 3 is there, where we get a sort of little recap. And the format in this one, I'm sort of seeing a loose sort of exposition, development, recap kind of thing developing here, but it's not really set in stone. It's more just a straight ABA of sorts here. So I hope you enjoy this one. I'll leave the first page on the screen there for you to watch as we go along. lots of fun to play, very fanfare-like. I think a great way to start off a concert and to start off our session today. You can see in the middle, we kind of go to G minor in a roundabout kind of way there without using the G minor key signature. And that to me sort of reminiscent of a middle section or a development. And then somewhat of a recap at sort of joining the first themes in progress, if it were, a recap in progress. Something that classical composers did a lot of without going right back to the beginning introductory material. So a loosely regarded, I think, sonata form developing there. You can hear references to Scarlatti. A lot of people might say, well, Scarlatti we put in group one with the Baroque music. There's all these transition figures. I don't think Matteo Albéniz is. I think he's firmly in the classical period here with this music. The left hands are a little bit simpler. There's a bit more elegance, almost like Stile Gallant, which we'll hear a little bit later. But this one, I think, firmly in the classical period. Second piece, an andantino, and this comes from Georg Benda's Sonata Number 3 in D minor. This is a second movement, or a middle movement in this particular sonata, and I think it's important for students at this level to have the opportunity to play through a slow movement to get the idea of what it's like. It's in 6/8. It's got a lot of different shifting action and things like this. Benda's an interesting character. I think a really good spokesperson for the Stile Gallant, or this gallant style, very elegant, very courtly. He was also sort of the inventor of the melodrama and wrote lots of operas, and so you hear lots of drama in his keyboard music like this, with quickly shifting scenes and moods, quickly shifting rhythms, irregular phrase lengths. We don't have this really nice 2 + 2 = 4 phrasing at all like Mozart would give us. It's more like Haydn, but even a little more off the beaten path in terms of the phrase lengths being very unpredictable in the motifs. Here's page 2 here. It unfolds somewhat slowly, but at kind of a moderate pace because of the 6/8, because of the fast notes and the decorations. So I'm not dwelling too much on this one. In terms of form or structure, I see a very clear, well not clear, but a rather pronounced ABA, where we have section A at the beginning. Section B I'm noting at the bottom in bar 17 in the last line, where we go through some different material. And then I feel the recap definitely at bar 29. There's a major structural moment that on the score kind of goes hidden. But I would say about 4 bars before that, the end of the second line on this page, I start to feel and anticipate that something's going to happen. Something's going to shift and bring us back to A minor quite firmly, which I try to deliver at bar 29 to announce the structure. So to me, a very clear ABA, could be exposition, development, recap, but because it's a second movement, it's not really going to be in sonata form necessarily, especially this type of pre-classic sort of music. So I think of it more as an ABA song form or a ternary structure here in this one. Now, this might not be every student's cup of tea to play this movement, I fully realize that, but we wanted to include again in the Mosaics album things that are off the beaten path, things that are a little bit more interesting, especially for those more cerebral learners necessarily, but there's a lot of opportunity here to express. And I think students are starting to get into that by this level, hopefully. So I hope some of you can sell this piece to your students. I know I'm going to try really hard with mine to get them a little bit off the beaten path and make sure they can play a slow movement like this with all these interesting rhythmic groupings. Hard to learn, not very intuitive at first, but once they get the hang of it, I think that's a pretty good representation of how it can go. Next piece, some Beethoven. It's nice to have Beethoven from the Opus 119 Bagatelles here. This one, Beethoven's always thinking about orchestra, right? And he makes us do things that maybe our hands don't want to do on the piano, and that certainly fits into this. He's thinking about flutes and piccolos, violins, what are the basses doing, and in this one is a really stark contrast between light and dark. This classical, everything's balanced in order, but everything is light versus dark, loud versus soft. Part of the orchestra versus the whole orchestra that we get when the 16ths come in the second part. Very simple A-B structure to it. Sometimes you'll hear people take this nice and calm in the first section and they'll speed up when the 16ths come in. I'm not going to do that today. Alfred Brendel would be a good example of that. Very effective, but there's nothing in the score that really we can see that indicates that should happen. Of course, Alfred Brendel, I think, always had good ideas. I just don't know what they are, why he would do that. It's exciting enough just to hold the line on the tempo. I think this would be quite difficult for students to play, but those broken chords in the left hand, if given enough time, I think students could really pull this off. There are places where he wants the pedal held for long periods of time. I think given the right treatment and playing softly enough that could certainly work as well. Here's the second page. Some of you may know this piece already. We don't see it too often in conservatory albums, but we thought it would be a great addition to grade 7 here. I'll leave the first page up there for now. Lots of fun, almost scherzo-like, and again, in the second orchestral part, he doesn't care about the piano technique and what's involved in actually doing it. He's thinking orchestral, and he just expects us to find a way to make it happen. So not for every student. Some students aren't going to have the technique to play this, perhaps, especially at the right speed, but fun to try and sell them this piece, I think, and get them to blend in and work into it. I think a lot of people really, or a lot of students will really want to play this. Sonata in C minor. So this is by J.C. Bach, Johann Christian Bach. This is Bach's youngest of all of the 19 or so kids that he had. And J.C. Bach was quite famous in his time, perhaps more famous than his father, because he was writing in the new style. He was, well converted into classical music. There's evidence that he worked with Mozart when Mozart was young in teaching Mozart composition for a period of about 5 months or so, which is kind of interesting. And Mozart always gave J.C. credit for having helped him develop his style and his voice as a composer. Also inventor of the Sinfonia Concertante, which sort of grew out of the Baroque Concerto Grosso, the idea of having the whole orchestra playing and just part of the orchestra playing and pitting those sort of concerto-like aspects against each other. And in terms of the form for this one, to me it's just sort of a straight binary. We're starting in C minor, we quickly go to E flat major, and then we start the beginning material again in E flat major, working our way back to C minor. It's not full sonata form, sort of a loose binary in a way, not a lot of inventiveness in the structure that way. This piece also I find a bit problematic for some because of its length. If we take a look here, this is a third movement, prestissimo. I'm going to try and play it at least presto for you just to give you an idea of the flavor. I think it'll be easy to sell students, but I wouldn't try and sell this to every student because of the continuous left-hand movement and the fact that they're going to need a lot of endurance, I think, mentally to pull this off. I know I did. It took me a while to really get this in my hands, to get through 4 pages of this kind of thing with the left hand so controlled in the background. But this piece, we would never hear this on an exam, and so we wanted to include it in the book because I think it has many redeeming qualities. There's a lot of excitement to it, and it gives us this sort of pre-classic notion of how they were going about things. The phrasing's becoming a little bit more clear in J.C. Bach's hands, and at the time, people just loved his music. It was what was favored over, let's say, his father's Baroque music. So I hope you enjoy this sonata in C minor. Again, starting in C minor, most of this is in E flat major, coming back to C minor at the end. See if I can flip the pages correct. I need 4, so I've got 2 books here to work from. I wanted to bring that down a bit too. Those of you here, I'd be curious to know what you think of that piece. Would you be able to use that with your students, do you think? I think it's definitely going to be possible. Again, the length is the one sort of drawback on this one. But I think there'd be a lot of students that love the energy and the fast-paced nature of it, and the sharp contrasts and dynamics. A little bit difficult to control on the digital piano, I found at times, for sound, to get those dynamics out there. I find this thing is a little bit too resonant at times, this piano. But I was using a more mellow piano voice here. Yeah, Kim, you're saying you definitely have a student who would love it. Yeah, I think so too. Bit of a gamble. We struggled with this one to see if we should include it or not, but there it is, and we're happy to have it. And the more I get to know it, the more I like it as well. Okay, a piece by Anna Bon de Venezia. This is one of her sonatas. Anna Bon we put firmly in the classical music category in Group 2. But you'll notice this piece actually comes from a set of sonatas that she wrote specifically for harpsichord. I believe it's all of her Opus 2 written for harpsichord. And so I struggled at first. I had to go back and research and figure out, this looks a lot like Baroque style to me. The left hand is a little bit leaner, but the right hand, I put on the harpsichord sound and I played it and I realized, oh yeah, she definitely was thinking of harpsichord in mind. There's sometimes wider leaps, lots of fast running sixteenths, something that we would definitely see from the Baroque period, but with a little element of classical style there. So we keep it in Group 2 because we want to keep all composers only firmly in one category. When you look at the rest of Anna Bon's music, it is in classical period. So we include this one in Group 2, and that's where it should be played on an exam if students choose. But again, the right hand is so ornate, it moves around, it covers a lot of ground, lots of interesting modulation, but also the form. The title sonata is one thing. We can see that title in the Baroque music period too, because of the overlap in the pre-classical period from Baroque to classical. But this one, the format is definitely hinting more at exposition, development, recapitulation. You can see the repeat dots there, where we've got, I think, is reminiscent of a development in the middle of the first page. And then we get a definite recap at measure 55. This is the fifth line down on the second page, where it's identical to the beginning. So we get a fairly clear ABA, maybe not A with first theme, second theme, bridge, closing section, all of that. So it's not necessarily sonata form, but you definitely get this beginnings of it. So again, it's sort of pre-classic in design when it comes to form. So I'll leave that first page up there. And again, I'm going to use a little brighter piano on this one, just to try and get that detail across. So I find myself, even though I'm designing these sort of Baroque lines, there's a lot more linearity to stepwise motion than you would see in most Baroque pieces. And just the overall polish and the sound I'm feeling in a much more classical sense in this one. So that's why I think it firmly fits in there. We've got some structure that's reminiscent of classical music, and so that's why we put this piece here. And I would encourage you to go check out some of Anna Bon's other music that's out there, that's available, that's been published lately. Okay, on to Clementi. This one's a little more familiar. We expect this to be a very popular piece. No, Conservatory Canada, we haven't published this before, but you've certainly, I'm sure, seen this before. The reason we're putting it in the books here, even though it's a bit more popular, is because, again, we're using from Opus 36 Clementi's final version with considerable improvements. Again, there's a webinar from a couple years back that George Lythurst did with Dr. Arthur Uhl that we had on the YouTube channel, that where they spent an hour going over what they felt was Clementi's 7th edition of Opus 36. And with considerable improvements, just simply refer to the fact that he reworked a few things to take advantage of things like the extended range on his instruments that he was producing. Clementi was a piano maker. Adding pedal, you can see in the middle of the second line where he wants the pedal held for 2 bars at a time. On the modern piano, I don't quite do that, but I do try to get some layered pedal effects there. Looking at the second page, you'll see some reworkings. You'll hear some things that are a bit unfamiliar because they've jumped an octave higher or they've become decorated in little ways. And then this one, a very clear sonata form, I think. If we look at, I'm just going to dig out my notes here. A very clear exposition, development, recapitulation. This one, though, we don't get necessarily 2 themes like we do in some of Clementi's longer Opus 36 sonata first movements. But we definitely have first theme that gets repeated, a closing section beginning around bar 18, that's in the 5th line down, and then development after the repeat where we get sequences and modulation right away, which is very typical of the development of classical sonatas. And then we get on the second page, after the modulation to foreign keys and these sequences that are layered on top of each other or superimposed, then we get the dominant pedal section, and that's at bar 42. The forte here at the end of the second line. Oh, let's go back. What did I do? There we are. So forte there at the end of the second line. We get a 5 of 5. Going in the next line to 5, the C, the long C pedal tone in the left hand that signifies the return of the recap to come, where we get the full theme again, the full one theme, and then a longer closing section, the last 2 lines. So very satisfying, a little bit more mature, not as mature as some of the longer sonatas where you'll get 2 full themes with a bridge in between them to modulate. This one, though, is just that scaled down version, hence the title Sonatina. So hope you enjoyed this one with its considerable improvements. And again, those were by Clementi himself. So taking full advantage of the piano there with his resonance, extra notes and little things like that. Hope you enjoyed that one. Lots of spirit. We find that that's probably going to, we feel that that's probably going to be the most popular piece in the classical section of the book. A lot of students are going to want to learn that. And then we finish off here with the Sonatina C major, a first movement. So again, we're getting a nice sonata form here in a more mature form, and this is by Dussek. What did I put here? Yeah, we get, it is sort of sonata form, but again, it's a little bit loose. We get an A section. We've written out the repeat halfway through that first page, and then we get a B section on the second page where the 16th notes begin. A bit problematic in this piece to balance the tempo. And that lasts about 8 measures, and then towards the end of the second page we see a return of the A section. So it is an ABA, maybe not so firm exposition, development, recap, because we don't see modulations quite in the same way we would with a second theme in an exposition. and the development kind of changes quite radically. We don't get necessarily well, we do get sort of a significant sort of feeling of a recap coming with the dominant chord, but it's not as prolonged as some of the others. So in terms of sonata form, it's there again in a loose kind of pre-classic way, not as refined as Mozart, and certainly not as refined as Dussek, some of his other sonatas or sonatinas. This one, the big problem is these 16th notes in the B section. They kind of come out of nowhere, and if we look at the beginning, I had to think about this for a while. The allegro quasi andante indication at the beginning, piano dolce. I mean, who writes the words andante and allegro together? They're two totally different things, really. And so what I've decided to treat this as, when we get to the 16th notes, there's definitely an allegro feel, but there's something andante and unhurried about the beginning, which cautions me to leave room for the middle so that I can actually perform that middle part. A lot of students are going to have a hard time with this, so we're going to have to take it a little bit slower. I'm going to try and take it as slow as I can, but sometimes I get to that B section and I find that my left hand has to really hustle to keep up, and that's hence where the quasi or the allegro part comes in, treating this as a quasi andante in the A section. So let me know what you think about this one. Again, something we don't normally see in the conservatory albums, but certainly not absolutely foreign either. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the second page up for you to watch here as I go through this particular one. And there's a bit of a third as well, so I'll leave the second page there for you to watch, which reminds me to set up a page turn here. And so that's the last of the classical music there. Again, only 7 pieces, nice and concise. It's a little bit to choose from, but I think there are going to be students that want to choose from more, and we encourage you to check out our old New Millennium Series book if you still have copies of that grade 7 book. There's a lot of great classical pieces there, and many other sources as well. And again, we've put more effort in this particular book into what I'll start playing next time, and that is music from the Romantic and the Modern eras. There was just way too many nice choices there to leave anything out. So that's why the classical section, and even the Baroque section, a little bit skinnier than we might see. We also find that as time goes on, it's getting harder to sell those older, what I call museum pieces to students. They'd much rather play the stuff from Group 3. And on our exams, students have to pick 2 from Group 3. And so that's why you're going to see more of the repertoire here. I'll just scan through quickly so you can see. It might be a good month before I'm able to get to this yet. I know the classical music, I did have this already a couple of weeks ago, but I got sick last week, and then we had some snowstorms the week before, so I was unable to get to this when I wanted to. Piece by Josephine Lang. Hugo Reinhold. We have 2 pieces by Reinhold we don't normally see. Theodora Dutton, whom we featured in the grade 6 book. Really neat piece from the same series we featured before, Cécile Chaminade. Mazurka by Chopin, another piece by Reinhold. Marie Jael, who's been in some of the grade 5 and 6 books, some of her pieces. Edward McDowell, this one's a little more famous. Stephen Heller, a piece by Brahms, one of his simplified versions of his waltzes, and then Granados, among others that I'll get to in the subsequent one. I'll just scan through quickly so you can see what's there to come in case you're curious and you want to purchase this book now, but you want to see what's there. This is the music that I'll play through here over the next couple of months for you in some subsequent repertoire sessions. Anyone here in the Zoom room, if you have any questions, feel free to throw those in the chat box for me. Maybe I'll just speak for a moment. We have our deadline coming up next Friday, a week from today, for our spring session June exams. Those registrations are coming in fast and furious. We hope to have exams in at least 19 different centers. We've had to chop a couple. It's great when you teachers, you reach out and you ask, hey, what is the likelihood of exams happening in my particular location? I can give you a pretty good idea. But first I ask you for what are your numbers. And so a bunch of you have been reaching out, and it's great to see that we're going to be able to hold in-person exams still. Again, that's only about 1/3 of our business these days, so it is harder to execute those. And over time, we see some centers dropping off. We see some centers growing and coming more online, which we're really grateful for. Of course, you can register for Flex Online exams anytime throughout the year. And we're coming into that busier season now, where I'd say instead of the usual 2 weeks, I'd say in April, start allowing 3 weeks when you register for Flex Exam before you choose your dates. And then going into May and June, please allow us 4 weeks. If you try to register in May and June for a Flex Exam in June, let's say, it's going to take us longer than that to book them. We just get so overwhelmed because that's 2/3. It's harder to book those exams. We do them all on a one-by-one basis still. At some point, we're going to figure out how to get AI on our site to help us with some of that automation. But in the meantime, do allow us a good month to book those May and June exams. So we appreciate if you can register sooner. And then once you register, you will see in May, there's probably a 2-week delay before we even get back to you with those dates and how things look. So give us extra time there. We really appreciate that. And again, that deadline next Friday. For the June session. And then beyond that, students do have an extra 2 weeks to still register, but there's a late fee attached. We try to get students in as early as possible so that we can do the work of setting up the exams and finding examiners and that kind of thing. So if anyone has any questions here in the Zoom room for me, I'm going to stop the live stream now. Those of you on YouTube, thanks for watching. Watch your inbox for more coming up. It'll be about 3 or 4 weeks before we meet again.